Good morning. This is Murat, and I am addressing you virtually. For some reason, it seems that you are not with me at the moment, but of course, we need to continue. So I will be recording this session, and I hope that you will be watching it at your availability. Now, you have heard the situation that unfortunately we are suspending all the contact sessions at YAMK, and we will be continuing the course virtually. So what does that mean, virtual continuation? I would like to share that with you before going into today's lecture. I have made some changes in the structure of the course. So the main change is that we were supposed to have an exam on April, was it 22nd or the 21st? But now, given the new situation, we will not be having an exam. And to replace that, the three cases that we were supposed to be doing together in the class, that's the Finland and Nokia case, Singapore case, and the Dutch flower case, those will be replacing your exam. So 40% of your final grade will be coming from the case analysis. What does this case analysis mean? It means the following. Under the case analysis folder, you see that I have put here two questions related to each case. You are expected to read the cases before the sessions when we will discuss about them. And you are expected to write in your own words a 5-page report on answering these questions in the light of the cases that you read. So you will be assessed based on those reports. I tried to share it equally between the three cases. So if you divide 40% by 3, so about 13.3% of your final grade will come from each case. Your reports should be returned by 9:30 on the date when we will discuss about the cases. So for the Finland and Nokia case, that's going to be March the 31st. So you should return your Finland and Nokia case to the return box that you see here on the left bar. After your return, we will be having this virtual session and we will be discussing about the case. The Singapore case, that is due by April the 7th, and finally the Dutch flower case, that's due by April the 14th. So that is the biggest change in our structure. So there will be no exam, but rather you will be writing individually reports about the three cases, which you will be submitting at the given dates to the return boxes that are on the left bar here under the case analysis folder. Of course, we will not be meeting in the class, but we will be meeting virtually. This is the link that you should be clicking and joining, writing your name. So we will be communicating in this platform during the lecture sessions. So our lecture sessions will continue to be at these dates as scheduled and presented here under the Start Here folder. We will also be communicating via email. I communicated this change by email to you. I hope that you follow your Young emails regularly to see any updates and to react as fast as possible. So we'll be communicating virtually during the rest of the semester. So that means it doesn't matter where you are. From this course perspective, you can be anywhere. You don't need to be in Finland. You may already be deciding to go back to France. That's perfectly okay from this course's perspective. Remember that your group assignment is still valid. The group project that you will be doing, which counts for 40% of your final grade, that is still valid, and you will be making your presentations on April the 28th, again in this platform. So 40% comes from the group project, now 40% comes from the case analysis, and 20% comes from your active participation in our virtual platform. I'll be making an exception, accepting that since this change was in such a short time, maybe you are not so agile to respond as fast. You may be perhaps thinking about what to do at the moment, whether you stay here or you move back. So understanding that, I record this session and I will not be marking any of you as absent. You should watch the lecture video at your availability, but I expect to see you at this platform next week, Tuesday at 9:30. So this is shortly about the changes that needed to come because of the current situation around the world. But I guess we should perhaps move on to the lecture of today, and that will be about the quality of the business environment. You remember the slide about competitiveness. So when we talk about competitiveness from a firm perspective, we talk about being innovative, we talk about being productive. So those companies which are more innovative, which are more productive than others, they are more competitive. We also said that there are factors coming from inside the company that contribute to competitiveness, but there are also factors coming from outside of the company. And we already touched upon those factors in our last session. We said that endowments, which are the resources in the location, they are important. They give some kind of advantage. We talked about inherited prosperity as examples. We saw resources such as oil and gas, for example, or forests in the case of Finland. But we also noted that it's having rich resources by itself is not enough. We need other things. We need to look at other determinants to understand competitiveness. We looked at macroeconomic determinants of competitiveness. We said that we need stable economic conditions. We also need institutions, political institutions, and also institutions for human development to be competitive. But then finally, we said that these things are also important, but at the end, what really determines competitiveness from external factors is the upper line where we see the microeconomic determinants. We looked already at the sophistication of company operations inside the company strategies. Today, we will be looking at the quality of the national business environment. And finally, in our next lecture, we will be looking at the state of cluster development. How do we assess the quality of the business environment in our location? Well, we will be using a model called the Diamond Model. That's by Michael Porter. This is a model that has been developed back in 1990, but it's been in use for the last 30 years. Perhaps the most commonly used model. And this is the model that you will also be using in your assignments in the future, in your group project, in your individual assignments related to the cases. So that is the model that I will be introducing to you now. Hi, Marie. By the way, I see that Marie has joined the session. Do you hear me, Marie? You can also unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hi, you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I can also hear you.
Okay, cool.
Nice to see that you joined. You are the
yes,
first.
Sorry, I had a problem with the application.
Right. So do you have any idea about other students? Are they having some problems with the application, or are they going to join?
I am the only one?
Yeah, at the moment, you are the only one, as I see.
I don't know, maybe they also had a problem with the application.
Let us see. Yeah, you are the only one at the moment. Okay. I am recording this session for your information, and the recorded video will be available to all the students, so they can watch it later. And this is I started by telling about the major changes that we will need to go through due to the recent change that YAMK decided not to continue the contact sessions, but we will be continuing virtually. So you can watch that part of the video when I share the video, but now I'm in the middle of the today's lecture about the quality of the business environment. So I'll be continuing with the lecture, and of course you can ask questions if you have any questions via using the chat area. You can put your question to the chat, or of course you can also just stop me anytime and ask your question. I will be asking you that you unmute yourself, because my voice may be echoing, or you may, if you are typing something or other thing, there may be other voices coming, noises coming. So let us continue the session, and please unmute yourself.
Okay.
And thank you for joining. So the Diamond Model, as I said, is the model that you will be using in your assignments. So it is quite an important part of our lectures, that you hopefully understand it very well. and use it very well. You may read about the model in detail in chapter 6 of your textbook. Now, let us get started with the model. So the aim is to understand the quality of the business environment, and that is important for companies when they make the decision about where to locate their businesses. So if you are thinking about the question, should I locate my business in France or in Germany or in Finland, then one of the things I could do as a manager would be to use, for example, the diamond model to assess the quality of the business environment in these 3 countries. So let us go through the model. There are basically 4 determinants that help us to understand the quality of the business environment. These are the factor conditions, demand conditions, related and supporting industries, and the context for firm strategy and rivalry. So let's go through these one by one. But before that, I would like to add that Porter, when he designed this model, he also thought that there are 2 factors which are perhaps, according to him, not direct determinants, but they are influencers through these determinants. One of these factors was the government. So as we know, perhaps in the US, the government is not considered to be directly involved in business. So if you ask any US manager, what are your expectations from the government? They would be saying, oh, let the government be away from the business, don't interfere to business, let the market operate by itself. That would be the response. And what we see from the US is that the government is not an influential actor when it comes to businesses. But this kind of situation differs from country to country. When we go towards Asia, we realize that countries are more influential in the development of economies. We know, for example, China, the Chinese government's influential role in the Belt and Road project. You are, I'm sure, very familiar with this project as you have been planning to go to China. China has the great ambition to build the old Silk Road, so-called the New Belt and the Road Initiative, in order to increase its trade possibilities with the rest of the world. Developing infrastructures in neighboring countries, not only neighboring countries, but in countries extending all the way to Europe, to Africa, to develop the old Silk Road. When we look at, for example, other Asian countries, we will be seeing the case of Singapore. We will be seeing there also the influential role of the government, especially when the country is in is poor. If you think about the private businesses don't have the capital to invest for business. So in those cases, we see that the government takes an active role in making large investment. There are state-owned enterprises in these countries during their economic development phase. So this is one of the debate areas regarding the diamond model, how we should see the role of the government. So Porter thinks that the government is outside of the model, but it influences the country's business environment through influencing these 4 determinants. Another factor that is not mentioned in the model, but is mentioned as an external factor, is indeed today very important. It's called chance events. So chance events are events that are outside the control of policymakers. And now today perhaps is the right time to discuss about the chance events. As we all know, the situation with the coronavirus, that affects the quality of the business environment completely. We know all around the world, businesses are at the stage of stopping. The governments are taking, and again, we see here the role of the government as an indirect influencer, are making decisions to close most of the businesses. If you think about the case of Italy, supermarkets and pharmacies are open, but other than that, businesses are mostly closed. So this is what we would call a chance event. Other types of chance events for this model could be, for example, if some war breaks out somewhere in the country or in the neighborhood of the country. Nowadays, we can think about the situation in Syria, which has led to a high number of refugees from outside from the country to neighboring countries. So these are like chance events. Other chance events, if you think about the history, could be, for example, the breakup of the Soviet Union and the emergence of many smaller countries from the Soviet Union. So these are things that you may not predict, but happen. These are called the chance events. So think about these also when you are thinking of the model in your assignments. So let's start with the factor conditions. So we'll go through these 4 determinants now one by one. Factor conditions mean the resources inside the country that we utilize in enabling our business, in increasing our productivity and increasing our innovativeness. So if we are again comparing the 3 countries, France, Germany, and Finland, to decide where we should locate our business, looking at the factor conditions, we look at the human resources, the physical resources, the knowledge resources, capital resources, and infrastructure in these 3 countries. We can differentiate between basic factors and advanced factors. Basic factors are mostly sources of inherited prosperity. So what could basic factors mean? They could mean, for example, the infrastructure. If you think about the railroads, if you think about the postal system, the communication, transportation system, payment system. Nowadays, when we think about France, Germany, and Finland, we can imagine that the infrastructure is pretty much similar and quite good in these 3 countries. So this, in that respect, is a basic factor that is available in all of these 3 countries, which does not give us any advantage. If I locate my business in France versus Germany, from the infrastructure perspective, I think I don't think that there will be an advantage in one country over the other one. While if we think about, for example, as an option, Nigeria as a possible location for our business, then perhaps infrastructure may be an important decision factor if in Nigeria the infrastructure is not equally well developed versus France or Germany. Physical resources can be also considered basic factors. Those are things like, examples are climate conditions. We mentioned climate conditions in the case of wine production. We compared France versus Finland in our last lecture. And of course, climate conditions matter very much for wine production. Finland cannot be a competitive location in this sector due to the unfavorable climate conditions, but this is not something that we can change. We cannot change the climate of Finland. So that is, in that respect, a basic factor. It is basic, but it is very influential in the case of the wine production. So if you don't have it, you can't do much about it. So it is, in a way, a source of inherited prosperity. Natural resources, likewise, location, likewise, these are things that we cannot change. Finland will be where it is, France will be where it is. So these are, in that respect, also considered as basic factors. But the advanced factors, those are things that we can really change, and those are the factors that indeed affect the most on the company's innovativeness and productivity. When we talk about advanced factors, we are talking about mainly human resources and knowledge resources. So human resources are sources of human resources are important, as we discussed, because they are the ones who will be innovating. So the education system, the education of the skills of the employees, availability of skillful, educated human resources in the country, that is going to give our company a competitive edge. So if we want to establish our company in France, are we able to employ skilled, educated employees? If yes, well, that gives France an advantage over another possible location, let us say Germany in this case. So as locations, as policymakers, we can develop the skills of our human resources by investing in the education system. So that is one important advanced factor. Another one is the knowledge resources. So we also mentioned earlier that research and development is what will give us an advantage in being innovative. If we want to innovate, we need to invest in research and development. And when we say we, it's not only the company that is going to be doing the R&D, but the companies, they cooperate with actors in the cluster, such as research institutes, universities. So when we decide about investing in a location as a company manager, we would be looking whether in our neighborhood there are research institutes, there are universities with which we can cooperate in our R&D activities. So that will definitely give us a competitive advantage if in our neighborhood we have qualified, skillful researchers, research institutes with whom we can do joint research. So if we think about the case of Nokia, Nokia has been cooperating highly with research institutes in Finland in developing its mobile phone innovations. So the universities in Oulu, Tampere have been key collaboration partners in Nokia's R&D projects. In that respect, we consider it as an advanced factor, and this is also one area where policymakers of countries should invest to develop advanced universities and research institutes that can deliver high, good quality research. And of course, last but not the least, the capital resources. Now, earlier when capital was more local, so companies would be acquiring financing from local sources, this could be considered an advantage for countries that offered more available capital. But nowadays, companies can access capital resources from also international markets. So you can, as a manager, take loans not only from the country where your company is operating, but from also international markets. You can put your company to an initial public offering. You can list it in the stock markets of other countries. So in that respect, capital is in terms of loan and in terms of equity is more accessible also from international sources. However, perhaps one source of capital that is, let's say, more local, I would say, is venture capital. We have discussed about the attractiveness of Silicon Valley for IT companies. One of the reasons, perhaps, is that the Sand Hill Road in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley is where actually almost the world's half of the venture capitalists are located. So in IT business, to develop your idea, naturally you need capital, and venture capital at early stages is since your ideas are require risk taking, banks may not be the perhaps potential risk takers to offer you loans. So venture capital is perhaps the right choice, and in that respect, Silicon Valley, the Sand Hill Road offers much more venture capital possibilities compared to any other location in the world. So that gives the Silicon Valley a competitive advantage. Many companies also from Finland would want to locate their business in Silicon Valley, not only because they want to be close to other IT companies in that area, but also because they want to have access to venture capital that is much more available there. So these are the factor conditions. So when you assess the factor conditions of the location of the cluster, you should be addressing all of these 5 types of resources in that location. Let us move now to demand conditions. So what do we understand from demand conditions in the location? So again, let us get back to the basic decision. Do we want to establish our business in France, in Germany, or in Finland? Now, market, of course, is an important factor. If we establish our business in France, well, I wonder what's the latest population of France, but I would assume it's somewhere between 60, 70 million people. If you think about Germany, well, we have about 80 million people. And if you think about Finland, we have about 5 million. So the size of the demand, the local market demand is one important factor to consider. If I establish my business in Germany, I will be addressing or accessing immediately a market of 80 million people. While in Finland, my market size will be, the local market size will be about 5.5 million. Which one would we choose? Well, naturally, you want to be close to your target market as much as possible. Naturally, you would be choosing Germany over Finland from the demand conditions perspective. The demand conditions was indeed one of the key factors, as mentioned, for the integration of the European Union, the creation of the single market in 1992. that was because when Michael Porter made his study, he realized that especially American and Japanese companies, they have an advantage because they have a large home market. So in the US, we are talking about today for a market of 300 million people. In Japan, we are talking about, I think, 120, 130 million people. Why is large home market an advantage? It's an advantage because as you increase your production levels, you benefit from economies of scale. That means in the company, you have fixed costs and you have variable costs. The more you produce, your unit costs will decrease more. So because your fixed costs, they remain the same independent of whether you produce 10 units or 1,000 units or 1 million units. So if you produce only 10 units, your total fixed costs, they will be divided by 10 to find your unit cost coming from the fixed costs. If you produce 1 million units, then you divide your total fixed costs by 1 million, and that makes a much lower unit cost. Having a much lower unit cost makes you more competitive versus another company. Let us compare, in this case, two countries, Germany versus Finland. So imagine your company producing for 80 million people and another company in Finland producing for 5.5 million people. Well, of course, that makes a difference. The company based in Germany will have much lower unit costs versus the company in Finland. So that is the size of the home market is one important factor according to the model that gives advantage to the company.
Hello,
Hi, who is there?
it's me, David. I'm completely sorry, sir. I didn't understand that the courses will be like that. I don't saw my email yesterday.
Well, no worries. I'm recording the session. You can watch it from the beginning and you can continue to be with us in the rest of the lecture. No worries. I understand completely. We will be continuing in this way, and at the start of the video, you will see that I started by telling how we will be continuing from now on. What are the major changes coming up from this unfortunate situation?
Yes.
So we will be basically continuing virtually. You won't be having an exam, but you will be assessed based on the reports that you will make for the 3 cases.
Okay.
So we can discuss about this perhaps after the session is over. We can spare some moments with you and Marie.
Okay.
But I will ask you to mute your microphone in order to avoid any possible echoing.
Okay, no problem. I'll shut it down.
Okay, great. Just mute yourself and take away the video. Great. So we are talking about the diamond model, which is an important model that you will be using in your group project as well as in the case studies that you will be analyzing. We looked at that there are 4 determinants and 2 other external factors. So we started looking at the determinants one by one. We looked at the factor conditions. Now we are at demand conditions. We said here that the size of the home market demand is important to give an advantage for that market's companies in lowering the unit costs. But it's not only the size of the home market, it's also the sophistication of the demand. early home demand, I always give the example of, well, Finland is 5.5 million. No, I'm not going to say France or Germany this time. Let us talk about China. China is I don't know, is it 3 billion people? Now, if you think about sports, in sports, if we assume that the size is important to give an advantage, you would expect that China would be better in almost every area than Finland. But then let's talk about ice hockey. So it's not only the size of the home market, but it's also about the penetration, or let's say the demand to a specific certain segment. So if we think about ice hockey, okay, in China we have 1.3 billion people, but what percent of them are indeed skating? What percent of them are indeed playing ice hockey? Well, I think the figures should be very low. While in Finland, okay, we have the low population here, but a very high percentage of the population know how to skate. They learn it from the very early years at school, and ice hockey is very popular, and they you know, it's the most popular sports in Finland. And of course, as we see from the World Championships, Finland is one of the very good countries in ice hockey, next to other Nordic countries like Sweden, Canada, USA, Russia, etc. So of course, the climate conditions are important. You know, if you think about, forget China, let's go to Nigeria, which is also a big country with more than, I think, 200 million people. You know, when there is no snow in the country, how on earth will you play ice hockey? Of course, you can make the ice hockey halls with artificial ice, etc. But how do you learn skating naturally? How do you invest into that when, you know, the sun is shining during most of the time in the year? So that is also part of the demand condition. So it's not only the size of the market, but also the interest, and coming from other conditions, the availability of the demand for that specific area. That was the case for Nokia back in the days, in the 1990s. Mobile phone penetration was the highest in the world in Scandinavia, in Finland especially. So 5.5 million, imagine 80%, 90% are using mobile phones. While in another country, you know, even though the population may be higher, the usage may be lower. Of course, in time nowadays, all around the world, the percentages are high. Demanding buyers, what does that mean? Well, they say that, for example, one of the reasons why the German automotive industry, you may buy this argument or not, we can discuss about this, is because, you know, the Germans are highly demanding. You know, they are highly knowledgeable about cars, highly interested about cars. The men especially, you know, they know all the technical things, and when they go to buy as customers, they are very demanding. You know, they want better cars. So indeed the market puts pressures on the companies in that country to innovate. You know, when the customers want better products, well, in order to compete, you want to innovate to satisfy the customers' wishes. So that puts pressure on the companies there to innovate. That is the case about demanding buyers. But how can we measure whether the let's say German customers are more demanding than Finnish customers or French customers. So that is a bit perhaps not so easy to buy this kind of argument. When we say demanding buyers, here again coming back to the government, we can see the impact of the government on consumption, especially, for example, if we think about the environmental aspects. We know that the European Union is more strict about the environmental regulations. There is more legislation demanding companies to be more environmental friendly in their operations. So in the future, we can also imagine, compared to, for example, the US or compared to, for example, China. So in the future, you can also expect that perhaps companies from the European Union may be more competitive in areas related to sustainability. They may be, because of the governments, the European Commissions, and also the national governments' pressures, they may be innovating technical solutions for environment-friendly products and services. And as a result, they may be more competitive versus US or let's say Chinese companies from that perspective. So that is also one side of demand conditions where we see the impact of the government on consumption. Let's move to the third determinant. So that is related and supporting industries. Again, coming back to the basic question. As a company, we have the option to invest or to establish our business in France, Germany, and Finland. Which one would we choose? And the diamond model, its determinants, they help us to make this choice. So one of the things in this decision to consider would be whether there are strong supporting and related industries in that location where we will establish our business. So supporting industries, they mean suppliers. So as we know, no business is an island. We cooperate with actors, partners along the value chain. So if I'm deciding about if we are in the automotive industry, about the three countries that I mentioned, perhaps Finland would be not the best choice to invest versus France or Germany, because starting a business, an automotive business in Finland, would mean that we don't have access to strong suppliers in the value chain with whom we would be perhaps cooperating in innovation projects. We would be getting quality parts, components for car manufacturing. France, Germany would be naturally more reasonable choices to consider in our decision, because these two countries have the tradition, have the suppliers in the automotive industry. As we know, there are the companies in France, Renault, Peugeot, Citroën, and in Germany, Volkswagen, etc. So in that respect, having strong suppliers gives us an advantage to decide for that location. So that would be a motive for us in our decision. For the reasons that are mentioned under 1, 2, and 3, it will increase our productivity. Having access to high quality inputs from the suppliers that are nearby will improve our productivity. Secondly, we will be cooperating with them to make innovations, so we can have higher number of innovations that contributes to our innovativeness. And third, there can also come up by interacting with these actors based on trust, based on sharing tacit knowledge, that can also lead to establishment of new business ideas, formation of new businesses. And in doing that, perhaps a bit, we should talk also a bit about the related industries. It's not only the suppliers, but when we talk about related industries, this is perhaps a bit vague. What do we mean by related industries? Because now we know that, especially with the advancement of technology, it's difficult to draw borders around the industries. More industries are getting into each other. The boundaries between industries are disappearing. If you think, as an example, the mobile phone industry, back in early 2000s, the key competitors in the industry, they were Nokia from Finland, Ericsson from Sweden, and there was Motorola from the USA. Current competitors that we have in this sector, such as, for example, Apple, was not even manufacturing any mobile phones. It was, as you know, manufacturing computers. So Apple came in with the iPhone back in 2007, 2008, and it came from out of nowhere. As the software came into the mobile phone, we also see Google, which was not manufacturing any phones, which was not in the mobile phone industry, also enter the competition with its Android operating system. So Samsung entered the competition from out of nowhere. Samsung, as we know, from Korea, is involved in many different industries. It's a conglomerate operating in many different industries. So what is a related industry? Well, here, as the definition says, it's not the same industry, but it is an industry which offers complementary products, which there could be some synergies between the two industries. But nowadays, as we see, as technology has advanced, relatedness is becoming a wider concept. Anything can be related almost nowadays. So having strong players in the location from suppliers and from related industries will be a motivation for us to choose that location as our destination. Last but not the least, we have the context for firm strategy and rivalry. Again, back to the same question. Finland, Germany, or France? Where should we establish our business? Well, according to this determinant, we should look at where the competition is. So if the competition is higher in a certain country, well, that would be the choice for us, because competition means it puts pressures on us to innovate. Imagine the case of a monopoly. So, well, that would be the case of, for example, Alko, the distributor of alcohol in Finland. When there is no competition, they can charge any price. Customers will buy from Alko. They have no other option inside the country. So when they can charge any price, they can make any profit. Why should they innovate? Why should they develop their productivity? So in such a situation, in the long term, the company will lose its competitiveness by losing its innovativeness and productivity. While in the other case, where there is a lot of competition, as competition puts pressure on all the companies to innovate and to be more productive, those companies will be more competitive in the long run. So locations which offer high level of domestic rivalry indeed are locations that will be more competitive in the long run. There are also other factors in the context for firm strategy. Institutional environment, that is a very important factor. Here we are talking about some examples. Ease of doing business. So if I want to establish my business, how easy it is? Is there a lot of bureaucracy? Are there many, I need to visit different government offices before I can open my business? How long it takes? Do I need to get advices from all the legal assistants, lawyers, etc.? So we have the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index. You may remember, we may have looked at it in an earlier session. So looking at the Ease of Doing Business Index, how easy is it to operate in that environment? The easier it is, the less bureaucracy, the better it is for us as a company to operate. The more, let's say, productive we can be when things go smoothly without much bureaucracy. So that kind of environment would be more favorable for us to consider. Corruption, as mentioned there, would be another item under this factor. Imagine corruption, of course, increases the transaction costs. Imagine a location with a lot of corruption, meaning that to do your business, you need to be dealing with different actors, and there will be a lot of, let's say, gray economy involved. And in that kind of case, of course, you lose your productivity. There will be hidden costs which you need to add to your existing costs. And of course, you wouldn't want to be working in that kind of an environment. I think I shared with you examples from my earlier work experience when I was operating, when I was working in Azerbaijan. So we were unfortunately operating as crude oil transporters with different actors, state government actors, and unfortunately the environment was a bit corrupt, and of course in that kind of environment you never know whether you can keep your business in the long run. And it happened that the entrepreneurs who were running the business, they needed to go out of the market at some point. So trust does not exist, and if you were to choose, let's say Finland, Germany, and France perhaps are equally good in this institutional environment, but if we were to choose between France and Azerbaijan, of course France would be the better option looking from the institutional environment. Legislative environment, here as an example, we have the intellectual property rights, protection of them. We earlier discussed about the case of China, where the intellectual property rights are not well protected. Well, in that kind of an environment, we perhaps wouldn't want to make our R&D activities. You come up with an innovation, but you never know. The next day, your competitors may come up with copycat products of your product. So your innovation may not. You have invested a lot of money in R&D, and then you want to, of course, get a return on that investment. But you realize that it's so easy to copy your products by competitors. So that's not what you would like to see. Finally, of course, the motivations of the individuals, they also matter. We are talking here about the human resources. We are talking about the national culture. Some cultures are, let's say, hardworking. Some cultures are less working. If you think about the US, you know, in Silicon Valley, they would be working 60, 70 hours per week, while in Finland, you know, we would be working, let's say, maximum 40 hours per week. So here in Finland, we have a more balanced life between work and family. It is a value that we also spare time for ourselves, while in Silicon Valley, you know, they work like crazy. It's the whole working culture is built around working. Companies like Google, Apple, if you visit their premises, you see that they have everything there. You know, they have the gym, they have the hairdresser, very good restaurants. So they want to keep you there, that you keep working, and you know, you don't go home. So that's, you know, the culture, the working culture. That also affects on the success. Of course, that is, I think, one of the factors behind why we see such successful companies from the Silicon Valley. You know, the hardworking, you know, working all the time. Naturally, that's more likely to be successful than people who are, you know, just working from 8 to 4, 8 hours a day, and then after 4, you know, they rest with their family. So whichever is better from the quality of life perspective, we can discuss about that. But from perhaps the company's competitiveness perspective, the more competitive can be the Silicon Valley option. So we have, coming back, discussed about the 4 determinants of the diamond model. We looked at factor conditions, we looked at demand conditions, we looked at related and supporting industries, and we looked at the context for firm strategy and rivalry. As you will read in chapter 6, we also have these 2 external factors, the government and chance events that I mentioned earlier, that can also affect on competitiveness through their effect in these 4 determinants. So when you make your analysis in the case studies or in your group project, when you analyze the quality of the business environment or the cluster that you will be studying, what I would like you to do is to make an analysis looking at, as we see here on the slide, looking at here all of these 4 determinants, looking at what are the strengths, those are the pluses, and what are the weaknesses, those are the minuses. So that will be a good analysis of the business environment, looking at all of these 4 determinants in terms of their advantages and disadvantages. So this is a slide that I would like to see when you present your assignments. Now, we talked about the quality of the business environment in a certain location using the 4 determinants. One thing is important here to remember, that nowadays we are in a more international environment. Countries, we have these regional integrations such as the European Union, such as the NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, ASEAN, the Asian Regional Integration Initiative. So one criticism against the diamond model is that in today's international environment, we shouldn't only focus on the country's national diamond, but we should also look at that country's, the diamond of that country's key trading partner. So this was perhaps, the discussion was initiated that time with the example of Canada. Canada being a relatively small country, may be considered uncompetitive, but Canada, thanks to the NAFTA agreement, has close trading with the world's largest, one of the largest affluent markets, the USA. So if you think about the Canadian companies, they are not only supplying the home Canadian market, but they are also supplying the big US market. So the double diamond model was introduced in the 1990s following the diamond model to suggest that in analyzing the competitiveness of Canadian companies, we should also take into account the diamond of the USA, which is Canada's key trade partner. Nowadays, we can also question when we are assessing the competitiveness of Finnish companies, whether when we talk about the demand conditions, whether we should concentrate only on the home demand, which is 5.5 million people of Finland, or we should take into consideration the whole European Union, the single market in the European Union, which is altogether more than 500 million people. So these are kind of the debates that are around about the diamond model. Now, looking only at the country itself in today's international world may not be perhaps so valid. As we know, there is the regional integration initiatives. Now, what is important, as we see, is that most countries are trading mainly with their neighboring countries. So if you look at the key trading partners of Finland, Sweden, Russia, and then Germany, these are the three key partners, trade partners for Finnish companies. And I assume that holds for most of the countries. If you think about France, the neighboring countries, Germany, Spain, Italy, UK, perhaps are the key trading partners of French companies. So what is important here, if you think about the European Union, is not that we only create a free trade area or a union, but it is that we invest in projects that will develop competitiveness of the region. And here we can be talking about, for example, the initiative of China, the Road and Belt project. So how do we invest in the competitiveness of the neighboring regions? Well, here are some examples that are based on using the diamond model. Factor conditions. So we can invest jointly in improving the regional transportation network. So if you want to develop the trade, we may have railroads, other transportation possibilities that will allow movement of goods from one country to the other. So investment of China in railroads, establishing the old Silk Road can be a good example of this. Creating an efficient energy network. Now I will give here the example of Turkey. So Turkey itself is not a producer of sources of energy. So if you think about oil, if you think about gas, Turkey has very little minimum production of oil. Not even enough for its own domestic market. But Turkey has taken advantage of its location to develop, to become an energy pipeline between the sources of energy and the markets of energy. So when we say the sources of energy, we see here, for example, Azerbaijan as a key oil and gas producer, We see Russia as another oil and gas producer. Iraq, I won't count Iran because Iran is unfortunately banned from trading its oil and gas based on the US sanctions. So Turkey has built pipelines throughout the country that transport the crude oil and gas from Azerbaijan, coming from via Georgia and all the way. You see there down there the city called Adana. There is a port there nearby. So the oil and gas from the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan, move via the pipelines all the way to the Mediterranean port. So that is one project. Another project is coming under the oil and gas coming. It's the gas coming under the Black Sea from Russia to Turkey, and then continuing feeding the domestic Turkish market. It's a huge market with 80 million people, but also continuing to European markets. There are also other trans-Anatolian pipeline projects that are completed to transport the energy from the sources to the markets in Europe. So this kind of infrastructure building is important together with the neighboring countries in developing competitiveness. We also talk about not only infrastructure building, but also harmonizing the regulations, linking financial markets, eliminating trade barriers between the countries. Again, harmonizing the regulations, the bureaucracy. So different countries, of course, if they have different practices, but harmonizing them makes it much easier to establish operations also in other countries. Coordinating competition policies, IP protection, that also contributes to develop more trade, more businesses, more investments with the neighboring countries. So we can continue along this list. What else can be done related to also the demand conditions, harmonizing environmental standards, technical standards. When we say technical standards, this kind of harmonization has been done, for example, inside the European Union area. So if, let's say, from Finland, you are exporting something to France or Germany, the products, they don't go through, once checked and the quality is ensured in Finland, that is equally good for the German or the French markets. So they don't need to go any quality inspections in these two countries. But if the products are coming from outside of the European Union, every single batch of the products, they need to go through inspections in these destination target countries. So harmonizing the standards is important for making trade faster across the borders. So looking at understanding the quality of the business environment is not only what the message I'm trying to share here is that it's not only about looking at the domestic business environment, but we should also think about the neighboring, what's happening in the neighborhood. And if you look from that perspective with Turkey, well, we can see the effect of Turkey as an important location, combining, let's say, Europe with the Middle East and Africa. That advantage we can see in, for example, the case of Turkish Airlines, which is flying to the highest number of destination countries, using Istanbul as a hub, which has close, let's say, close means like 3 hours flight distance to European capitals, is a hub for transporting passengers from Europe to, let's say, Africa or to the Middle East. That is an advantage for Turkey. But on the other hand, looking at chance events, what's happened in Syria, leading to 3.54 million refugees in Turkey, well, that's not a very nice situation from Turkey's perspective. Analyzing it with the diamond model, we can consider it to be a chance event. So in the other perspective, again, building good relationships with the neighbors is very important. When we are improving the competitiveness of our location, we should not only look at inside factors, but we should also look at our relationships with the neighboring countries. It's again an unlucky situation that Iran is banned from world trade by US sanctions. That would be a very good trading partner for Turkey, which Iran has these good natural resources and a big market. So that would be a very good trading partner. In those respects, I would like to conclude by saying that also look at the relationships with neighboring countries, what kinds of projects are being developed with neighboring countries to develop the country's own business environment, competitiveness, because at the end, we do most of the trade with our neighboring countries. I think that concludes today's lecture, and we are quite on time. I will be now stopping the recording, but then with those of you who are here, we can continue to discuss about the course a bit and about your situation. So I will be stopping the recording, and this will be available to you shortly as a recorded video.